Before we go into your story, I actually want to talk about resilience. It's something you've mentioned a lot in other interviews, and you've personally mentioned that building resilience has been key on your journey, starting and scaling your business. So can you just expand and talk more about that and what resilience has meant to you?
Yeah. So I really believe it's one of the most important things to kind of cultivate as an entrepreneur. And for me, it's, to put it differently, it's kind of like ability to bounce back, ability to be flexible, ability to meet a challenge. And with entrepreneurship, in the early days, but kind of forever, you're solving problems. Like that's the crux of starting a business. You're solving a problem and, or creating something that doesn't exist to fill a void, or however you want to spin it. It's a form of problem solving. And so inherently, you're going to be meeting challenges and hitting walls and coming up against barriers. Otherwise, this problem would have been solved already by someone else. And you need to have that resilience, that ability to meet that challenge and not be discouraged or get discouraged and come back from it later. And it's really building that ability that allows you to thrive and grow. And for me, it's just been, if I had to isolate everything to one trait, I think that would be one of the greatest predictors of success when I look at myself, when I look at, people on my team, people I look up to. I think it's really building that resilience that supports people through this journey.
I love this so much. And me being in the thick of my own journey, it is so true. Like you are dealing with problems all day, every day. And if it was easy, then everybody would be doing it, right?
Totally.
And I love the resilience aspect. But would you say, like, kind of looking back at the earlier days, I know you opened up about it in another interview where you said, I had self-doubt. I was very insecure. So how have you cultivated this resilience trait, which you mentioned is just so critical?
Yeah, so in a lot of different ways, when it comes to the self-doubt, I had a lot of naysayers when I started the business, and I actually now think that might be a great sign because, again, if it's so foreign, there's no precedent for understanding, that maybe is a bigger opportunity. At least it feels that way, or I tell myself that. But I met so much criticism and I had so much passion about the problem I was solving. So that is really what allowed me to meet that. But building myself up and resilience in that particular situation took the form of me bringing myself back to the problem I'm solving and why, and what I'm passionate about, and how challenging some of these problems have been for me, and thinking about the broader population. So kind of like bringing it back to the facts and not getting caught up in certain people's opinions or perspectives or biases. That's how resilience took shape in that situation. But the other big thing as an entrepreneur is, and you know this, your job is constantly changing because, you have to do everything at the start. It's just you. And then finally you get to a place where you can bring someone else on. And in a perfect world, you bring someone else on to take on a role and they're much better than you. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, great. Now I'm free of that specific thing. Let's take on this new thing that I have no idea how to do and have never done before. And so that's like the nature of that, is having to be really resilient and flexible and learn new skills and just be really comfortable being bad at things and appreciate that you will get good at them.
Oh, I love that because I actually think that's a skill you can cultivate even before you jump into entrepreneurship. I kind of jumped around in my career and I never had a problem being the less knowledgeable person in the room because I knew I had the confidence to figure it out. And I think if you can cultivate that skill early on, it will only benefit you
100%
in your business.
100%. Yeah, you absolutely don't need to have a business to cultivate this. I mean, this is a skill that will carry you through all the challenges of life, and in a perfect world, get you to a place where you meet a challenge and it's an exciting opportunity for you to grow or to figure something new out, or, really taking on that kind of obstacle is the way mentality. That's one of our principles with our team. We talk a lot about the obstacle is the way.
Oh, I love that. But I will say what you're saying in terms of from a business perspective, I am so living and breathing that. Like once you hire a team, you have people, you're like, okay, I got this, but then you're getting to the next level of the business. And I'm just like, man, I don't have the answers. Literally this week, there's been 5 different projects and initiatives. And, as a CEO, you're the one that has to kind of lead and put the overall scope. Of course, your team can support, but you're the one that sees every aspect of the business. So you have a different angle. And I'm just like, man, I don't have the answers. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming. But what you mentioned in terms of zooming out, and it sounds so basic, but it's true. It truly helps zooming out and really understanding the why and the mission. Mm-hmm. And I'll connect with the customer when I need that inspiration of why I'm doing it. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, this is why I'm doing what we're doing. Or I get an email of someone's life changing. I'm like, this is what's motivating me. So it sounds basic, but that why of what you're saying and the mission, I think is a superpower in building this resilience. So whatever you're doing, if you can know what the broader mission is, because business is tough, and we'll get into your journey, but I love that. And I think that's such a great way to open up the interview. So I actually now want to talk about your childhood. And it's interesting because as I'm reflecting back on your life, like you've had resilience even as a kid because you had so many health issues that you've had to navigate and bounce back from. But can you share with us more about what your childhood was like and kind of how that shaped your view of the world?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a great childhood in so many ways, but I was sick a lot. And thankfully, I was not sick with anything life-threatening, but it certainly affected my life quality. I have an autoimmune condition. I had a really weak immune system and all kinds of things from that, allergies to everything, just all kinds of challenges. But I really struggled with tonsillitis. I had chronic tonsillitis. I would be sick for weeks at a time. And because I can't take antibiotics because I have an allergy, no one really knew what to do with me. I was a situation where I really needed a tonsillectomy, but it was deemed too dangerous because in the case of infection, I can't take antibiotics. So I had this experience where I would be sick for like 3 weeks at a time on a regular basis and sick to the point where like it was hard to breathe. It was very painful. It was very uncomfortable. And I credit to my parents, and the Canadian medical system, I was able to see a lot of specialists and like I saw everyone, and it was a really frustrating experience because I was seeing these great people who specialize and I was hoping would have answers and resolution for me, and I just didn't fit into the traditional Western medical model. I found no resolution down that road. And so from a very early age, I started exploring the world of natural, and I found a lot of amazing things in that world, but I was dealing with something chronic and something viral, and I didn't find anything that was like a silver bullet that just fixed all my problems. And maybe that's too much to be looking for, but I became really disillusioned with the world of natural health because I felt that there was a lot of like beautiful branding and big, bold claims and anecdotal evidence, but it was really lacking in science. And I had a frustrating experience a number of times. I had this both with pharmaceuticals and with natural, where I took something that I expected to help me and I had a really severe allergic reaction, and it was, a dangerous situation. And I just felt like it was so polarized. There's like Western medicine and pharmaceuticals and OTC on one side and then natural on the other. And I really wanted something that was safe, clean, and effective, but rooted in science. So I knew there was efficacy there. I knew that it would actually help me. Yeah, I just became really frustrated with the entire space. And that frustration later pushed me to do something about it. But that was, my experience for a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, your passion came from your own problem eventually, but, there's nothing more beautiful than really understanding the pain point to like push forward on the business. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And, I want to talk about college time. So, you went to study abroad in Florence. And I know you said you like worked your ass off as a waitress to like pay for it. So you are expecting this to just be like the most incredible experience. And you got like pretty sick. Like you usually have gotten sick, but pretty sick at the time, right?
Yeah.
So kind of walk us through that experience and why it was so pivotal, especially on your journey.
Yeah. So I was actually studying, my exchange program was in Sweden. So that's where I was studying. But when I got sick, I was visiting Florence.
Gotcha.
And we were on holiday. So I was visiting friends there and I was with a bunch of my friends. It was great. But yeah, so it was my first big trip. I had, typical broke college student. I worked really hard to get out there and be able to be a part of that exchange program. And it was really frustrating. And I just kind of felt like, man, I'm always on the bench at like these very special experiences. And so when we got to Florence, I got really, really sick, really severe tonsillitis, very, very painful, hard time breathing, hard time like swallowing fluids. It was just unbelievably uncomfortable. And I was speaking to one of my girlfriends who was pre-med, and she, her older sister was in med school out there, and she was like, you need to talk to a pharmacist and figure this out. And so I was very, very fortunate to meet this incredible pharmacist when I was in Florence. And I spoke to her about my whole life experience, all of my allergies, all of the things I had a reaction to, what triggers the symptoms, the whole thing. And she was like, oh, you need propolis. And I was like, okay, what's that? And she's like, from the bees. And I was like, okay, I've tried everything. I don't think honey's going to cut it.
Yeah.
I was like very, very skeptical. And she explained to me what propolis is, that it's not actually honey or a honey derivative. It's its own compound that the bees make coming from plant and tree resins, and it has antiviral effects, and it's got antioxidants and, all of these amazing things that can really support healing. But most importantly, it's an immunomodulatory agent. So for me, being autoimmune, it's really tricky to find something that helps to stimulate my immune system, but also not kick it into overdrive where I have a reaction. And there's very powerful antiviral effects with propolis. It's like a well-studied, well-documented immune support system. It's been used for it's been used for thousands of years. The recorded use dates back to like 300 BC.
Wow.
I could be wrong, but I think that's right.
Yeah.
We can fact check it. But yeah, so humans have been using this for a very long time. So it's not some like new thing. We have a very long healing history. And it's powerful. So she sold me this little tincture of propolis, and it tasted like vodka. It did not taste good because it was in an alcohol base.
Okay.
And so that later was part of my reformulation when I started my own. But so she sold this product to me. She was really compelling. Of course, after all of the reactions I've had to different things I had tried at that point, I got on PubMed right when I got home and did some research, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of studies on how propolis affects immune system. There's studies looking at propolis and how it affects inflammation. There's, all kinds of really compelling evidence that this is something that could really help me. And it's something that, although it's totally natural and, free of synthetic ingredients and allergens and like all the things I need to worry about, it's quite powerful seemingly. And so I started using it, and in 5 days I made a full recovery. And basically my experience was propolis functioned for me the way antibiotics do for most people with something like tonsillitis. And I was able to totally bounce back. And then because I had done all this research on propolis, I understood that you can take this on a daily basis and really rejigger your immune system. And that's what I did. And so since 2012, I've taken propolis every day. And I still have my tonsils. I haven't had tonsillitis since 2012.
Really?
I very rarely get sick. Very, very rarely. And my immune system is completely changed. It's pretty amazing.
That's amazing. I mean, it's so fascinating because clearly you've tried like Western, Eastern, all the things, and someone's telling you to take honey, right? You thought it was honey at the time. You're like, what? Like,
yeah.
what?
And I love honey, by the way, but yeah.
But I'm sure you were desperate and you're like, I got to figure out something to do.
I was like, I need something serious here.
Yeah, ASAP. But that's so amazing. So I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but you clearly had this incredible experience with propolis in Europe. You come back to Canada for college, and you ended up apprenticing with a local beekeeper. So I'm curious, like at the time, were your intentions to start a business, or what were you kind of thinking leaving Europe and now kind of diving deep into this?
So I thought I was going to become a cancer researcher. I have this long experience of having to do all this research on everything I put in my body.
Sure.
So I was, passionate about putting that to use.
Yeah.
I did not think I would start a business, but I had a really hard time finding propolis. And then when I did find it, I struggled with the quality. There's a lot in North America, there's different pesticide regulation than in Europe. And a lot of bee products, including ones that are certified organic, have trace amounts of pesticide exposure. Now, for a lot of people, a lot of things in our environment, a lot of foods, so much has trace amounts of pesticide exposure, but I'm autoimmune and incredibly sensitive and reactive to that. So for me, ingesting pesticides, particularly when my body is in a vulnerable state, even a tiny amount that for other people really wouldn't affect them, it can be really challenging for me. So because we do not have the same regulations as they do in Europe, I was like, okay, well, clearly I need to run quality control for this myself.
And you tried one, right? And got like very sick.
Yeah, I bought this organic propolis that was really expensive and fancy. And it was also just generally hard to find. There was a lot of honey, a lot of Manuka honey was popular at that time, but propolis in North America, it really wasn't well known. It's really well known in Europe. There's a really long history of use in parts of Asia, but in North America, I mean, honeybees aren't native to North America, so it's not so crazy that we wouldn't have as nuanced of an understanding of like all the things the bees do. But I had a really hard time finding it. I finally found this like fancy bougie propolis, and I had an allergic reaction, and I was really frustrated and upset by that. And so at the time, being a student benefited me. So I, accessed the lab. I ran a toxicity panel. I figured out there was pesticides in it. They were trace amounts, but still. And then I started to understand the ecosystem and what's happening in the world of agriculture in North America and why there would be pesticides in this product that was more expensive than the one I bought in Europe and says organic on it. And once I learned about all of that, I was like, okay, well, I need this stuff. I can't really move to Europe in this moment.
Yeah.
So let's just start beekeeping. And then it was when I started beekeeping that I just fell in love with the bees. I mean, it's the coolest thing in the world.
Oh my gosh. I love it. I know. I mean, it's not very common. You see a college student kind of beekeep and do it as a
my friends thought I
side
was
thing.
nuts.
Like, did she lose her mind?
They thought I was like actually nuts. Yeah.
So interesting. But I can understand the why behind in terms of you wanted to kind of create, or you needed it for yourself.
I needed it, yeah.
And kind of having that research interest, you're going to dive deep into whatever you're passionate about. So it's kind of cool how you directed that to beekeeping and propolis. So from my understanding, you started kind of creating these like mini prototypes or like products for yourself and friends, and people were buying it. And you mentioned that it was kind of like a dream for you to start a business because you were helping yourself, you were really enjoying it. So tell me more about why that didn't really pan out the way you did when you were graduating college, even though you had this like massive interest and passion around it.
Yeah, so it really evolved organically, just making stuff for myself, sharing them with friends. And then I started to kind of sell them on campus. And it was really cool because I was getting amazing feedback from people. I felt like I was helping people. I had really transformed my own health at that point. And I had a really detailed understanding of how to work with the bees, the important role that they play in our overall environment, what's happening with the bees in terms of population decline and pesticides and all of these things. And I was just like, ready to save the bees and reform healthcare and all of that, like really, really passionate about it all, and just really enjoying myself learning about all of this. But I graduated with debt, and I didn't have any money in my pocket to start a business. I didn't have any connections. I didn't really know what fundraising was. Like, I had really focused on sciences, so I didn't have an awareness of these things. And I was really fortunate. I had a job offer out of school. It was a research position at a financial firm. And it wasn't the type of research that I was necessarily interested in, but it was research in the biotech field. So I was still looking at big pharmaceutical companies. Which was really interesting and an amazing experience because I think it framed the way I look at things now. But yeah, I felt like I kind of had to take that job. And it was this funny thing because I was so fortunate to have that opportunity. I mean, so many of my friends, so many people graduate with a ton of debt, no opportunities. I mean, my husband graduated in 2008, and so we talk all the time about like his experience versus mine.
Yeah.
So I was really fortunate, and I had this pretty good on paper job, but it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. And so I did that for about 10 months. And then 10 months in, I was recruited by Goldman Sachs, and I joined them because I was just like, next step in the career, more cash, great. This is like, I should be so happy. And I was there for just over 2 years. And I had, talk about cultivating resilience, like all of these experiences where you're not you're faced with challenge, or you're having to work with personalities that don't align, or you're just, to put simply, not getting what you want or what you expected. You have to really cultivate that resilience. So there was so much that I learned from both of these opportunities, and I had to kind of get to a point where I was like, I'm really unhappy, and there's something that I want to be doing and that I feel pulled towards, and everyone thinks it's crazy, and I'm leaving like the safety and stability of this situation that I'm so fortunate to be in, but I have to try it.
Gosh, this resonates so much with me because I kind of went down the finance route too. I did it for a while, 6 years, I think. And it's interesting because when you're in that world and so much of your story resonates, like, and you want to get out of it, people think you're nuts.
They think you're crazy.
They literally think
this is the best job in the world. Nothing else exists.
Yes.
You're never going to be able to like afford a meal again. Like, it's so wild.
It's crazy. I know. And tell me more. Well, I actually have two questions about this. So one thing during that time, which I thought was super interesting, was you had a spreadsheet. Like, I love this because my brain works like this, but tell me about this happiness spreadsheet because I think it's super interesting and can help people listening.
Yeah. So when I was working, you know what it's like, I'm sure, it's analyst crazy hours. Like I was pulling a lot of all-nighters.
And you weren't getting sick. I was getting sick.
I was using propolis.
Yeah. Because your health is like deteriorating during all that. Yeah.
Yeah. People would make fun of me and like call me a hippie and stuff on the desk because like I had my propolis here. I had, the whole situation.
Yeah.
My bee pollen, everything. But I I wasn't getting sick, but I also wasn't well. I was really unhappy. I was starting to have panic attacks, not sleeping at all. I mean, just the like, I was really only in finance 2013 to 2017, but like the number it did on my sleep over the long term, I'm like still trying to recover.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
It's tough. And so, yeah, I just kind of realized like I should be happy, right? Like I have, more financial security than I've ever had. I'm so lucky to have a job when so many people don't. Everyone around me seems to think that like where we work is the best place in the world. And I am a really unhappy person right now. And I'm really panicked and anxious and like I'm having heart palpitations and I'm in my 20s.
Wow.
And I sat down and made a spreadsheet and I was just trying to identify the specific points in time and things and moments where I was the happiest. Things, activities, whatever it was where I can remember like a peak happiness experience. I tried to kind of catalog it and then break it down into time periods and try to understand. And one of the things that has and continues to make me the happiest is beekeeping, working with the bees, being in nature, being in the kind of like beautiful solitude that is beekeeping, and solving health problems through research, really looking at the problems I face, learning about the problems that my friends face, and really using data to figure out a better way to approach these problems. And so those are just two experiences in life that fill me up, and what I was doing didn't. And also, again, just like cultural differences, like feeling like you're in the wrong place, I'm sure. I mean, did you have that kind of experience in finance? Now you're fully immersed in the wellness world.
Yeah, well, I had a different experience. I mean, I ruined my hormones through, birth control and just a lifestyle, and I'm still recovering from, that time. But I mean, you were working on the trading floor, which is a completely different culture than like investment banking, corporate banking. That's like way more intense. So I can only imagine what you were going through. And what I find so interesting, and I kind of look back, and it seems like for your journey too, we were kind of following the money, right? I also had debt, and also the way people look at you, like, oh, you work at JP Morgan, you work at Goldman. It's like they look at you like you're this
like you're smart,
you made it. And I'm like, no. And then you're making the money, but at some point you're like, okay, this might be a really blanket statement, but I didn't feel like people were happy and fulfilled with their job, especially some of the women. There's not a lot, but I was like, I just don't see myself in anyone here. The personalities are different. But then it seems like also with you, like you realize the more money doesn't equal happiness. And I didn't know that actually. I thought the more money you make, and as you kind of go up the ranks, like you've made it. And we clearly both found that out early on, that that's not what brings you happiness. But
I think I saw that. And look, I have friends who are still in finance and doing so well and so happy. So, of course, for different people, different things work. Every team within these huge organizations, every team is different.
Yes.
I was on a primarily male team. I was on a team with a very aggressive culture. It was very like, this is before the self-care era. So it was like, if you take vacation, you're out. Like, it was like that was not okay.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was a very particular team. And I think I looked at my superiors in that situation. I looked at my bosses, and they were unbelievably successful, but wrapped up. And again, this is like my team and my particular experience, and not everybody is like this at all. Yeah. But the things that they were chasing, and they were always chasing, and it didn't matter what level they hit. There was always like someone new to compare yourself to, something new to chase. And that wasn't the life that I wanted. Like the problem they were solving was like more money, more things. And like those were not the problems that filled me up or made me happy. Like those things actually made me very depressed.
And remind me, wasn't there a story like your boss put you in the room and kind of went through like the financial upside?
Oh my God, yeah.
Can you share that? Because I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I told someone senior to me on my team that I was not super happy.
Okay.
And thinking about leaving. And I was kind of like confiding in this person, and this person was quite senior to me. And I think he was trying to save me in his mind, but he took me into the boardroom, and like, so I told him what I wanted to do with this little bee product company. And he basically, like, using arbitrary numbers, just broke it down on one of the boards about like where I would end up and how, like, at Goldman I could end up here, and this is a choice to end up in my parents' basement completely broke.
Wow.
And it was a tough experience because, one, I was mid-20s and this person's a lot older than me and very successful and someone I really respect, someone who I look at as like an intelligent, successful individual. And I was kind of like confiding in them and sort of vulnerable and opening up. And it was just there's such a finality to it. There was such a like, this will fail. You're wrong. You are dumb and naive. And like, you need to sit in your chair and put a smile on your face or you're going to ruin your life. And it was just like very extreme. And it was also a really great turning point for me because it was so extreme and hurtful. And it made me really clear that I don't want to be that. I don't want to be in this environment. And like, I'm going to try and prove this person wrong.
I mean, talk about resilience. Like, a lot of people might have just listened to him, right? I mean, he's more senior than you.
Yeah.
I was way more impressionable in my 20s. I didn't take the leap until I was like in my 30s. So props to you being young and being like, you know what? Forget this guy. Like, I'm going to prove him wrong. Like, that's really incredible.
I mean, it's maybe I had so many tough experiences on the desk at that time that I think it was like the build up and again, the whole way cultivating that resilience and, you know, realizing that like, being so scared of failing that I don't even try, like, where does that land me? Because I'm not happy now. I don't think I'm going to be happier doing the same thing with like a bigger apartment.
Yes. Yeah. And you don't know that until you go through it yourself, right? So no, I love that. And even to kind of think about this leap, because I think some people think you just kind of leave your job and you start a business, and it doesn't really work that way. I mean, you've been thinking about this idea years before even you got your corporate job, you know? So you actually also gave yourself a timeline when you were at Goldman. So how did you think about that timeline?
So I was like, I need to be out of here in the next 6 months to a year. The sooner the better, mostly because of the frequent all-nighters and just lifestyle. And I looked at all my options. I was looking at, you know, the logical transitions that people at that time took from Goldman. So a lot of people were going to tech. A lot of people were going into consulting, going to the buy side, like stuff like that. And I was like, these are all things that I could do right now with this thing on my resume and this experience. But there's really one thing I want to do. And so I started really saving and living in an incredibly frugal way. And I saved up enough that I could really go kind of a year without income. And also I would have to forego rent, but I could survive. And then also have enough to kind of do an initial purchase order and buy enough product and inventory that I could, you know, sell it to some amount of people. So I just basically did that calculation of like what it would take. And I got to that point and I took the leap. So I left end of 2016. I moved in with my best friend who generously let me crash on the couch for 2 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, very lucky
in New York,
for that.
So small places.
It was really small. It was a 2-bedroom apartment in Chelsea, but there were 4 people living in it. And I mean, like, this is stuff that flies in your 20s.
Yeah, I'm like, now
And so it was a full house, but it was also a really fun time in a lot of ways. And it was an interesting time for me because I had I was like, you know, there's a culture in finance and my peers and all of this. And like, I really left that world and entered a very different world. And, you know, I went from wearing like a really chic outfit and like walking into 200 West to standing at a farmer's market with a cardboard sign. And it was just like a very different experience, but I was so much happier. And I built up from there.
I love that. And I think, you know, that cushion of savings that you had makes these leaps so much easier. It's still tough, but even for me, before I even knew what business I wanted, I was just stashing my money. I'm like, one day I know I'm going to leave and do something. I don't have an idea. And it just worked out years later. So I love that because it gives you the confidence to be like, okay, I have this amount of money. You were thinking I'm going to live with my friend, you know, just being a little bit thoughtful about it, which I think is good. And it makes the leap a little bit more palatable and not as scary, at least.
Totally. You have to factor in your life. And I know, I feel like over the past few years, there's been this sentiment with entrepreneurship of like, dive in, sink or swim. And I think it's really healthy to also get experience in the workforce. There's so much that I took for granted then in the workforce, just understanding personality dynamics, seeing how things were run, things that I really liked and learned from, and things I didn't like and learned from, that I take with me today. But having a plan and getting yourself to a point where you're stable enough to be able to create, that's really important for some people. For me, it certainly was.
Yeah.
And look, like, stability can mean different things. For
Sure.
some people, it wouldn't feel so stable, like crashing on a couch and not being able to pay rent for 2 years. But I took stock of what I needed and wanted and what I was comfortable with, and I made that happen.
And before that, were you doing these were you creating these products in your home when you were at Goldman? Like, what was the
Yeah, so I had my own apartment when I was there, and
had
I
all the
was
money.
I bought a bunch of lab equipment, and I
Amazing.
was making product. I was sourcing from my mentor out in British Columbia at that time, at that apiary, because that was the apiary with the product quality that was basically meeting my standard. And I was, he was like harvesting them, shipping them to me, and then I would do extractions in my apartment. My friends used to joke that I was like running a meth lab.
I mean, someone in finance, that's so random.
Yeah,
too.
it was really, really random. It was really funny. My husband now, because I still, like, when I moved to LA, like, I brought like a lot of my lab equipment with me because it was expensive stuff. I'm like, not
it's
throwing
not
it
cheap.
out.
Yeah.
Now I do not have it anymore, but we work with labs now. It's not like me in a hazmat suit. But yeah, so he saw that and he was like pretty weirded out. It was like kind of early into us dating, and like he didn't realize that I was like really into chemistry. But yeah, it was really funny. So I was doing it that way. It was like very small batch. I would go to markets, and then I started getting like pre-purchase orders from individuals, and I was really championed by two groups. One was like millennial parents who were looking to support their family in a different way. And then it was a lot of young professionals dealing with autoimmune, a lot of people on the East Coast with Lyme disease, a lot of just different autoimmune things. And it was interesting because it was like young professionals that were in the corporate world and just like not finding solutions. So those were kind of the two consumer groups. And I had like a little email list, and I had like my people that would meet me at different markets, and I would take these pre-orders and do it that way. It was just really small scale.
Well, what's so great about that, even with a crazy job like you had at Goldman, where you had, nights that you would be there multiple days a week, you were still kind of dabbling in this business. I mean, it wasn't like a massive business, but you were still creating products, like putting yourself out there. And I think that also kind of helps with the confidence boosting for you to take that leap.
Totally. Yeah. I had done so much work with it, around it. I knew what I was doing. Like, I knew what I had I mean, it had been years of beekeeping at that point, and I wasn't actively beekeeping while I was working at Goldman, but I knew what I was doing, and I had a plan, and I thankfully understood what was required at that point and was able to scale somewhat quickly, all things considered.
Yeah, I love that, because I think some people look at you and they're like, oh, she quit her job, did well, like the business blew up. I'm like, that's why I love going into the details of like, you were doing this on the side. I mean, fast forward years even before you were selling it at farmers markets. So what's really incredible is 6 months into the business, when you were fully dedicated, you did $600K, which is amazing for the first year. What were your early marketing techniques, and how did you create that, I guess, success so early on?
It was a lot. I mean, Instagram was kind of big at that time.
Yeah.
And I was using Instagram, and I was really doing like longer form content, very science focused. I would kind of put it into two buckets. One would be ingredient focused, science focused, like validating kind of health claim stuff. And the other would be educating about the bees and what's happening and where these things are coming from, so people can feel like they really understand it versus the experience when you like get a pill bottle. So it was leveraging social media in that way, but a lot of it was just connecting with customers. I think, and customer experience, I mean, I know this is the case for you too. It's so important to understand who your customer is, what they want, and how to support them. And I think simply because I was like standing at the market, getting real-time feedback, watching people try it, take it home, come back the next weekend or 2 weekends later, or email me, that I was able to really perfect the product and really iterate. And I was so small at that time that iterating was quite easy. I was able to like really shift things and change formulas and meet my customer where they were. So it was really a combo of digital education and then meeting and understanding your customer, and like all of the surprise and delight stuff I was like inadvertently doing because I was like following up with people and like, oh, your 6-year-old has strep throat. How's he doing? Like, how's this? Because I was like connecting with these people and I wanted to know. And I was so curious how these products were working for different people at different ages, dealing with different things. And so I was able, that kind of carried me, and I was able to create this word of mouth business, and my email list built up, and then I was able to put up a website, and it was a very slow build, but it was connecting, understanding, building the product for the people who needed it.
I love this so much because it's such a organic and approachable approach. Because I think sometimes I think business plans are important and to be thoughtful, but it's really like one step in front of the other, which I love hearing your journey. Like it came from, okay, Instagram came out. How do I educate people on what I'm doing because it's so unique? Okay, I'm going to go to these farmers market, connect with customers, iterate, which is so beautiful when you're small because it's so easy to do. It's like a blessing.
It is.
And having strong customer experience, which I'm smirking because that is kind of where I'm at right now. Like I care. I'm like, oh my gosh, how's your daughter? Or like, how are the menopause hot flashes? Like I care. It's actually getting to the point where I'm like, how do I scale myself for customer experience? Because it's tough. Like you really develop relationships with your customers.
You have to find the best customer love team. I'm really lucky with that.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Is that, now I'm going off a tangent, but is that something you focused on like pretty early on in the business?
For a very long time, it was me.
For a very long time.
For like longer than it probably should have been.
Really? Okay.
I was also...
It's hard to let go of that.
It's something that fills you up too.
Totally.
And so it's like... I was so scared, and I think I'm always scared of this, like losing connection with the people you make the products for. And so we do a lot to stay connected now and try to scale these things or these experiences. So yeah, I was doing it for a long time. And then I met a really thoughtful individual, and she's still with the company. She's like so wonderful and has such strong interpersonal skills and like really, really cares.
Yes.
And seeing her in action, I was like, okay, I can take my hands off the wheel. This is like a unbelievable person. So I got really lucky. And then, when you have that experience, bringing someone on who cares the way you do, she wasn't coming from a beekeeping background, but she just cares about people. And so I think I was lucky to have that positive experience. I have other parts of the business where I brought someone on who was the wrong fit and it was really challenging. And then I had the scar tissue and to work through that. But I was really fortunate in that situation to find great people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you said you were doing that for so long, because my husband is like, you just need help. Like I'm literally doing email. I know. All the time.
It can. I mean, it's a big job.
Yeah,
it's a really big job.
And if someone's unhappy, it's like I'm like
so
all
hard.
hands on deck to be like, what could I do? But
totally,
like you said, it really fuels me. Like I love that part. So it's a chicken and an egg. But that's amazing. You found someone that cares. I think that's like the number one trait.
Yeah, and then staying close to that team, and then making it a dialogue throughout the company. I was telling you before we started recording about our team retreat, but we talked a lot about the why, the mission, who we are. We always say internally, people, planet, propolis. And so like those are the three things where we're trying to really have impact. But whether you're in our finance department, sales, marketing, customer support, tech, whatever it may be, thinking about what is the problem you're trying to solve here at a high level, and how can we meet the people who need us more efficiently and connect with them more deeply. And so just having that conversation on an ongoing basis with everyone is really great.
I love that. No, super inspiring. So I'm going to go back to, early days of the business. You're doing really well financially, and you ended up raising money, I guess somewhat early, when you were doing 600K. And, to date, you've raised over 20 million. So I'm sure there's a lot of learnings and things you can share with our listeners right now. But what would you say would be maybe some of the biggest learnings you've had in the process, particularly in the earlier days?
Yeah. So it's interesting because earlier days of my business, I feel like growth was really rewarded and fundamentals was not as big of a focus. And now we've had this like swing back in the other direction, which I think is really healthy.
Yeah.
But I've always been very focused on fundamentals, and that could totally be something that I got from Goldman. Yeah. I spent so much time looking at companies. So of course that shaped me. But lots of people have great success raising with a concept and choosing whatever valuation, but it was pretty by the book. I was doing this number in sales. I did a multiple of that. My first round ever was a priced round, which you don't see a lot, but it was very calculated, and I did really good forecasting. Not really good, actually. It was awful.
Forecasting
Totally
is
wrong.
always interesting.
Totally wrong. Now we're really good because I have much
great.
better people working with me. But I was doing a level of forecasting that you don't typically see at that stage. So I was really, I think what helped me fundraise and what made the pitch a really compelling story was that I had built it out in such a specific way. And I had a lot of like, you know, if this vertical doesn't work, here's how we go. I had really thought about all of the what could go wrong, what could go right. And if things go really right, how we scale and don't hit problems. And by the way, we hit all of the problems scaling at different times. But, you know, obviously we were able to get enough right that we're here today. But yeah, I was really thoughtful about it. And I was kind of ignoring to some degree what was being rewarded in the marketplace and just thinking about like, simply what makes a viable company? Like what create, like how do we get, what's the path to profitability even at this very, very early juncture? And just having like talking about that stuff and being very balanced, I think really helped. My passion, so passionate about solving this problem. I, at that point, had a really strong understanding of the pharmaceutical landscape and what was going right, what was going wrong structurally, really understanding the growing interest in the world of natural, the unfortunate growing reality of autoimmune in the United States and, you know, broader world, understanding my consumer, when a lot of that I got from just staying close to them. And so I was able to, at the point that I went out to raise money, I had been running a business profitably, like making money doing it. I had enough customers that, you know, I had some real data points, and all of that, like going out that way when you have tangible things, made it a lot easier.
I love it. And it probably gives you even more confidence.
It does, yeah.
You know, which I feel like I would need to go into that if we ever were to raise money in the future.
And it was still really hard. I mean, don't take me the wrong way. It's hard when you've put everything into something and believe in it and someone thinks it's a silly idea. That's always hard. But like that's where the resilience comes in. And then also expecting that, understanding the landscape, not taking it personally, and working harder to find the people who this idea will resonate with.
I love that. I think what you said, like having the expectations that not everyone is going to say yes, like going into it knowing people are going to reject you. They may not understand, but that's just part of the process.
Yep.
So you mentioned, you know, scaling at different points of the business. There's been so many mistakes and I'm sure so many setbacks. And, you know, I don't think we go into that enough. I think we glorify entrepreneurship. Like Carly started this business and now is like killing it.
It's so easy and now we're rich.
Yeah. No, it's not like that at all. So I don't know if there's any like one or two moments in the business that you mentioned, like you have scar tissue that you kind of look back and you're like, dang, like that was a interesting learning experience that you can kind of share with us.
I mean, managing can be really challenging, and I've been, all things considered, very lucky. I love my team, and I've been able to just over the years work with such incredible people, but it can be really hard when, you know, someone comes onto the team who's not the right fit for the team. They could be an amazing individual, so talented, and just the wrong fit, and it all doesn't work. For me personally, like letting go, like I can be a bit of a micromanager. So that's been a hard lesson that I've had to learn. But then also just scaling. I mean, really, it was during COVID, there was a ton of supply chain challenges. We had a period of time where we had like so much inventory just stuck on a boat and we couldn't get it off, and we like had purchase orders to fill. And so that was really interesting because we had kind of reached this point where we had some level of success where we had large accounts placing large orders, and then we couldn't meet these accounts, and then we didn't have, you know, an efficient enough structure. And then also when you're working in CPG, which is consumer packaged goods, it's a working capital intensive business. Like we need to fund the next run of product, and we're constantly making things, and you have to make things before you sell the next batch. And so just having to understand how to do this at different scales and be ready to scale really quickly, but scaling really quickly, things can break. I mean, just this year, we onboarded an ERP system, which is the right thing to do at this stage of the business, and awesome. And thank goodness for my team, because I would have ruined everything if it weren't for my team. Like I have amazing people on my team who have been really running this project. But even that, I mean, there's losses when you integrate new systems, and that's kind of like a growing pain. And so at every level, there's new challenges. And I think it's, again, like how you meet those challenges. And I feel like I'm making it sound like I'm so graceful when I meet a challenge. And I'm just like, the obstacle is the way. No, I cry. I freak out sometimes. I've gotten really upset at different times. I lose sleep. But I am able to move through those emotions and come back to the why. And that's resilience.
I love that. You know, I've been talking a lot, me and my co-founder, we have a health series every Wednesday, and I've just been opening up about like me crying, and it's actually not a bad, like I'm now owning it, you know, coming from the finance world, it's like you go, no one cries. I'm still like working through that, but there's days where, you know, it's tough, but when I cry and release, like talk about resilience, I feel like now it's my superpower. I like get it out of my body, and then I'm ready to kind of bounce back, maybe like 2 hours later, but it's part of the process. And sometimes I wonder, I'm like, is it just me? Am I like the only one? But talking to friends like behind the scenes are like, I had a really tough day and I cried. Like, so it's just good to talk about.
I think it's great. My whole team has seen me cry. Like my team like jokes about how easily I cry.
Happy, even like for happy stuff.
Oh my God, especially for happy stuff. I cry all the time for happy stuff. Like a team retreat with me is just a friggin' tear fest. Like it's like
I can't even imagine. Having like a team and being at a retreat, you know, it's so special. Many feels.
It's so special, but it's also, I remember having a situation when I was in finance where I made a big mistake, and it was like a very public mistake. It was really tough. And someone yelling at me and getting in my face and being like, are you gonna cry? Are you gonna cry? Like in my face, like really close. And it was so, I think about the fact that I was like 24 and that person was like 46, and they spoke to me like that and did that. And I'm just like, oh, man. But yeah, I remember like that was it's such a vivid memory for me. And now I love that I can be so vulnerable and proud of that, and that we encourage that on the team. And not everyone's crying as much as me, but they're safe too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I just had a flashback. I had a similar situation where I was crying. I was taking time off during Christmas.
Yeah.
It was like months in advance. I had backup. You had to have like backup before you did. I got everything. I was like doing my, you know, everything was done perfectly. And this person wasn't happy I was taking time off during the holidays and wasn't nice about it. And I started tearing up, I guess, and threw the Kleenex at me and was like, here's a Kleenex. And I think she felt bad, but didn't know how to like own it at the time. Yeah. She threw the Kleenex at me, got out of her office that I was in, and was like, just deal with it. And I'm like, and like, I mean, I was also like 23, and I look back and I'm like, man, that's so
It was a baby.
Sad.
Yeah.
It's
Where's
so
the
crazy.
Support? Yeah.
So I'm glad we get to do our own thing right now in our businesses, which is amazing.
And those experiences are important because you're a very different boss because of that experience, and your team's very lucky.
And what I realize, and we're still obviously so small, but culture for me is so big. Totally. Kindness. I'm I think I have PTSD from the environment that I'm in. So I'm just like, we need to just all be kind. Like that's the number one thing that I think of all the time about as we bring in people. But yeah, it's interesting.
And not distracting with the politics. That's how you can really focus on solving the problem for your customer and making great things.
Totally. Amen. Oh my gosh. And there's one thing I remember you were saying early on, you finally got into Whole Foods Canada, and like the purchase order didn't, or like the manufacturing, there was some hiccups there.
Yeah, that was so brutal. Did
they forget, or like what ended up happening?
So we had to pay we had to pay fines, which was really tough at that time. It was really, really tough. I think I like docked my salary and like a few of the senior people on the team. We had a conversation about it, but we were like, we're going to have to do this. Is everyone okay with this? Who's not okay with this? And it was a very small team at that time, but it was really tough, and it slowed us down a lot. And we had to do a lot of like, there was a lot of like TLC needed for that relationship, because they were like, you're supposed to be like, you finally got in, you've been trying so hard. And so it was just really challenging. I mean, it was something we worked through, and again, it was an expensive problem to solve. It slowed us down, and we had to put a lot of time and energy into rebuilding that trust, and basically showing that we're a professional organization and that we're ready to be in this account and big enough. And it pushed me into action. I realized we needed support on the brokerage and distribution side in order to meet these accounts more efficiently and make sure we don't have issues like that again. So it was a fortunate situation to happen early on, because the structure that we then went and implemented carried us, but it was really tough. And just so many things like that along the way. But those problems are so important because that's how you restructure and build it better. So
And you don't, like, I think so many people want to have all the answers for everything. And it's like entrepreneurship doesn't work like that. Like, look, you got into Whole Foods Canada finally, and you're just like figuring it out behind the scenes.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that's
always.
just how it works. Yeah, I'm sure even nowadays you're still doing that at a whole other scale with different
Yeah, I mean, I
initiatives.
don't have any answers. I'm just always figuring it out. Like,
seriously, problem solving all the time. So one thing you said in another interview, which I thought was so interesting, is you mentioned that the individual with the calmest nervous system will win. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Yeah. And it's like certain people, if they listen to this and know me, are going to be laughing because like I wouldn't say I'm always super calm. But in challenging situations and situations of conflict, I'm like professionally in a situation of conflict, I am able to be very calm.
Have you always been like that?
Professionally, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's like personal and I'm like protecting my like friend or little sister, totally different thing. But professionally, I've always been able to be like that. Yeah, I think maybe it started by accident because I was like, I don't know how to respond to this. I'm really scared. But it's something that I learned could be a superpower. And so, yeah, in really challenging situations, slowing down, and I tend to speak fast. So literally slowing down your voice, keeping even keel, like just keep breathing, keep your nervous system calm. And what ends up happening is like the other person will keep, not always, sometimes they'll match you and you'll be able to resolve in a really beautiful way. But either that will happen or they'll keep escalating and you'll be able to maintain this baseline that will eventually bring them down, or they'll have like, they'll realize that, or, you know, understand where they're at with that and kind of come back to it or come back to it later with an apology. But it's a really powerful move in a difficult situation.
I love that. And I think like what you said, slowing down and breathing, like in the moment, it sounds so simple, but it really helps kind of ground you, especially if other people aren't grounded. And I think as a leader, you kind of have to be that calming force. Yeah,
you have to model that for your team. And I've had tough situations where internally I'm like, what the fuck? But understanding how I have to show up to support my team and what's going to be the best thing to model and help them feel calm if they're witnessing. And, you know, typically my team is not witnessing any crazy situations. But it's really important to lead that way and set that example, whether people are witnessing it or not. Just how you carry yourself and how you do anything is how you do everything. And so being really conscious of that in those challenging situations is important for everyone around you.
Yeah, and even yourself, like and how you manage through it too.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing you've been open about is that you've kind of dealt, you know, even during your Goldman Sachs days, like anxiety and whatnot. Is that something that you've kind of had to work through starting this business, or how has your relationship with anxiety changed?
I mean, it's something I have to work through for the rest of my life. I'm very type A. I'm just like an anxious person. Yeah, I mean, in some ways it really serves me. I think I have a lot of extra empathy and awareness, and I think I'm able to connect with people in a really lovely way because of where I can go or how I'm thinking about things, or just like my maybe unnecessary level of worry about like someone else's emotional state. But it can bring a lot of connection. It can also bring a lot of planning in a really healthy way, like planning what could go wrong. And so I've always been like that. I've always been like, okay, what's our Armageddon plan? Like even now, and sometimes my teams may be annoyed by this. No one said they're annoyed by this, but like I get it if they are. We like how we budget is we have base, middle, and growth. Yeah. So base would be like if things don't work out, if these things don't materialize, if we have some crazy supply chain challenge, if, you know, there's, God forbid, a fire at one of our larger apiaries, something like that. And then we have like the middle, which is kind of like we feel this is really achievable, and then growth. And we operate off the growth projection because we always try to meet those goals. But it's a lot of work doing 3 different projections. And look, they feed each other. It's not like crazy from scratch. Some people hearing this are probably like, oh my God, she's a psycho. But it's really served us. And it served us, during COVID. It served us with iOS 14 when we were a D2C business and had to quickly make a shift to an omni-channel strategy. It gave us kind of a roadmap for how to respond to challenge. And so that is something that is probably a benefit of
I love
anxiety.
that.
But going beyond that, I mean, I have to, and I'm so bad at meditating, but I have
Sure.
to meditate. I have to use these tools. I have to journal. And I have to just call myself out a lot because I will get really worried.
Yeah. And do you work with like a coach or a
I
therapist?
do.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Different times, both.
okay.
And it depends, what's happening, what life phase,
Sure.
what's happening with the business, everything. But support's so important for me. Like
Yeah.
I love working with people. And I learned so much in that way. I know some people who like they can read a book or listen to a podcast and they get what they need. And I get so much from those areas too. I'm always trying to read self-help books and, listen to podcasts like yours and that sort of thing. But coaching, therapy have been huge tools for me.
I love that. No, it's amazing. And I know we're getting close to time, but there's just two quick last questions I want to bring up. Also, it seems like time blocking is big for you. And I don't know if this resonates, but I think I read an article where you said you dedicate an hour a day in your calendar to react.
Yeah.
Tell me, I'm fascinated and I probably can learn a lot from this, but tell me more about what you do in this time period and like why it's important for you to have this 1 hour to react.
Yeah, honestly, I think I need more than an hour, but
yeah, I'm like, how does she do
But it helps. It helps. It's a time to respond to stuff because as the leader, you are, and I really encourage my team, and when we have this like ongoing dialogue of you don't just come to me with a problem, you come to me with like what you've tried to do to solve the problem, why it didn't work, and then we can problem solve together. Like I want to see that people have made an attempt at solving something.
Sure.
And sometimes it's too big and sometimes it's something that I should be solving. And so, but yeah, as a leader, people are always going to be coming to you for support as they should.
Yeah.
And you need to have space to react to that and to support people who need, and just for things to break. Things are always breaking. And as businesses grow, there are more third parties, there are more team members, there's more technology to rely on. Like there are just systems and things that break down, and making sure that you have time to, whether it's like going through your inbox and just responding to things, or sometimes I'll wake up to like SOS messages over Slack, and it's something that we can solve really quickly, but being like, okay, 2 p.m. I've got an hour, like let's do this. It just creates the space to move through things so you don't get that backlog. And it's really easy to just go through your day and have it totally fill up. It's
totally
crazy.
Yeah.
And that's been something that has been a game changer for me.
Oh, amazing. I'll have to try that. One thing I just implemented, because things, like you said, always come up naturally.
Totally.
It could be an employee, it could be a customer, it could be
Anything.
tech, it could be an email, whatever. And I realized like I can't schedule back to back meetings
it's so
because
hard.
things will happen and I'm always playing catch up, and you're in this like horrible cycle of like, what am I doing? I didn't finish this. So
and then you're stressed and you're like, I'm letting people down. I'm showing up late to this meeting. And so giving yourself and your team and everyone around you that time. It's also so hard. For me, it's hard to say no to things like on my calendar. And so that's a different thing. I don't have a solution for that. But
you're working through it,
I'm
but that's
working
good.
on it.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. But the back-to-back thing can be really tough because you do need time to
like just
look at something, process it, and make calls.
Exactly. And then I'm just not happy. I feel like I'm my analyst finance days when I'm, I can easily get into that mode.
Same.
But
I think it's like you're sort of trained
I know.
to operate that way. And I go there so quickly. And then I have people on my team be like, dude, you can do this next week. Like, why don't you push the meeting? And I'm like, I can't push the meeting because then it will be backed up this week. And like, I have like this fear.
It's a sense of urgency that is crazy. Like, literally, I had the situation last week and my husband's like, well, what's going on? I'm like, I'm just dealing with this stuff. I want to get it done. And I was like, you know what? I don't actually have to get that done today. Like, it's our company. Like, it could be done tomorrow. It could be done. But there's my autopilot is, and I think we're just trained like that. So it's not, we get a lot done.
Yeah,
but
there's good things that come from it.
Yeah.
And, it would be very hard to be a procrastinator in building a business.
True. It helped us in that way.
Yeah.
But it's something I'm trying to
unwind.
Unwind. Yeah. So it's interesting.
And team helps. But for me, and I don't know if this is just me, but like, it was letting go of things.
Sure.
Like, okay, let's let this person on the team do it.
Sure.
And not like they don't need me like holding their hand here. And so I mean that really helps a lot. But I do tend to, at every stage of the business, no matter how much support we have, create this like false sense of urgency that's so silly that I have to like calm myself out on.
So interesting. We had someone on the podcast where we talked about EMDR therapy, and I'm like, let me try to work on that. I just started. I don't have any developments yet, but
I want to hear about that.
I'm curious because I do get into that autopilot, and then time will not like go by, and I'm just like in the zone getting like shit done, which again is good, but like 5 days of that you're just burnt out.
You're so tired.
And you're like, what is this? Oh my gosh, I'm back to what I'm feeling like.
Yeah, and you're like resentful. And it's like, but
exactly.
you do that. I'm doing this to myself. Like no one's making me.
I know. It's so fascinating. So I'll let you know what I find out through the process, because clearly it's like an autopilot that we get into. So yeah, I'll share all about that when I'm there.
Awesome.
But anyways, Carly, I feel like we could talk about so much. This was amazing. I just so inspired by you. Love everything that you're doing. I feel like I could have talked to you for just hours, but you're amazing. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was awesome.